I'm Billy Hollowell, and welcome to the Inside Story. I'm joined today by the Christian Post, Ryan Foley. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, we've got a lot to break down today. We're a week out now from election night. It was a very big night in America for a variety of reasons. A lot of experts are out there saying the Democrats had a very good night and a very good election season. Why are they saying that?
Well, they won the governor's race in New Jersey and Virginia, as well as the attorney general's race in Virginia, the lieutenant governor's race in Virginia. They picked up seats in the General Assembly in New Jersey, as well as the House of Delegates in Virginia. They now have 64 out of 100 seats. Before it was just 51. And that's not to mention the New York City mayoral election, and then the passage of Proposition 50 in California, which resulted in the passage of a new map of congressional districts that's much more favorable to Democrats and designed specifically to eliminate Republican held seats.
So really, I mean, it's kind of undeniable that the Democrats had a better election night. When you look at the different races that were getting a lot of attention, which results were the most surprising to you?
The most surprising result was probably the Virginia Attorney General race, because that race was shaken up in the last month of the race when some text messages sent by Democrat candidate Jay Jones showing that he fantasized about killing his political opponents were made public. And after that happened, the Republican candidate, who is the sitting attorney general in Virginia, Jason Mayares, took a big lead in the polls. But by the time election day came around, Jay Jones ended up winning by about 6 points. That was the closest of all the three statewide races, but he still won, even though there was a lot of pushback to his comments.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because then you have to ask the question of, well, which issues were driving things then? Because it feels like that, for that sort of thing to be overlooked, there had to have been some bigger issues that were driving people to the polls to look past that and to choose a candidate that has that kind of baggage. Um, let's talk about New York City because New York City's mayoral race got a lot of attention nationally, more than normal. Why is that?
Well, this year it was a multi-candidate race, in contrast to the most of the other races that were focused on, meaning New Jersey and Virginia. There were more than just a Democrat and a Republican on the ballot. It was a three-way race between Zoran Mamdani, a self-declared Democratic socialist, as well as Andrew Cuomo, the former governor of New York, a Democrat who lost the Democratic primary to Mamdani and ran in the general election, and then Republican Curtis Sliwa. So Mamdani pulled it off with about 50% of the vote. He's a self-professed Democratic socialist, and he has been part of the defund the NYPD crowd and wants to raise the minimum wage to $30 an hour and establish government-run grocery stores. So his proposals are getting a lot of attention and causing a lot of concern from his political opponents. He still ended up winning.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely again you have another situation, and that was a very strange election because of the people running, and you had Cuomo running as an independent, and there's a lot of baggage there too. But that's going to be one to watch now that he's won to see what actually happens there. Now, a lot of people are arguing that these elections say a lot about the Trump administration and reactions to the Trump administration. What is your take on that?
I have to keep in mind that these elections were primarily in states that voted against Trump last year. New Jersey and Virginia both rejected Trump in the 2024 presidential election. New York City obviously did, so did California. So the states and cities that had these elections that people are talking about aren't representative of the country as a whole. While it's probably the government shutdown had something to do with it, and Trump's negative approval ratings had something to do with it. The elections next year will be in 435 congressional districts and only some of the states. So the map of the Senate seats and all 435 House seats will have more of an impact. So it's not going to be probably as lopsided, but it could be a bad night for Republicans if the Trump approval rating doesn't turn around.
Yeah, well, and that's going to be interesting to watch all of these elements, because elections come pretty quickly. You assume, oh, it's going to be 2 years, it's going to be 4 years. Well, they come before you know it. And so it'll be intriguing to see the long-term effect of all of this. Is there anything else you feel like we need to know about election night and the impact?
And there are some other races that weren't talked about quite as much, like in Texas, a parental rights constitutional amendment passed, and I'm actually writing about some school board elections. Loudoun County, Virginia, which is a very Democratic county that overwhelmingly backed Democrats here in Virginia last week, ended up electing a conservative school board candidate. Loudoun County has been getting a lot of attention because of its policy allowing trans identified males to use the women's locker room and bathrooms. So the candidate who won was explicitly opposed to men and women's sports and men using women's bathrooms. So that's something to keep an eye on. There were other school board races that happened last week. About 24 school board candidates backed by the 1776 Project PAC, which I've written about a lot, and they endorse candidates opposed to like critical race theory and woke ideology. About 24 other candidates won, and they endorsed 72. So there was also those races.
Well, I appreciate you breaking all of that down, and thank you for your time today, as always, Ryan.
Thank you.
Everyone else, make sure you tune in next week for another episode of The Inside Story and head on over to the Christian Post. It's christianpost.com. We'll see you again next week.